I love this game. Bill Walsh College Football on the Sega CD might be the best version of Madden 93 out there. The sound is a huge improvement, the animations seem to be better, the play control is still great, and this game is a ton of fun.
Touchdown!
It just makes me wonder why in the world they didn't come out with a Madden game on the Sega CD. Now, if you remember my review of the Genesis version of Bill Walsh College Football, you'll notice a problem right away. So both of the games look exactly the same. I mean, they really do look exactly the same. The graphics of both games are almost exactly identical. Here, I'll show you. So this Sega CD game still has that really annoying passing window system, for example. The graphics look almost exactly the same. This is right down to some of those animations. Now, the Bill Walsh game does have these videos of Bill Walsh talking about stuff. I'm not sure why this is in there.
You can almost segment the country geographically. The football played in the South today is the...
So I guess they did kind of take advantage of the Sega CD medium, but it's still really odd that the graphics are not much of an improvement. And believe it or not, there's actually a really good explanation for this. Naturally, having the game on a CD-ROM meant that the programmers could stick a lot more data in there than in a cartridge. We're talking about going from 16 megabits of data, or maybe 20 of those in expensive games with special chips, to 640 megabytes. This is a huge difference in storage capacity. And remember that we're talking like 16 megabits of data, so your biggest Genesis game will contain maybe a little bit over a single megabyte of code. For example, the Bill Walsh College Football ROM for the Genesis that I have is a little bit over 1 megabyte. The CHD file for the Sega CD version is over 380 megabytes, though the thing is that most of that is taken up by that full motion video, which is what it is. It's not the in-game graphics that are taking up all that space. Now, if you look inside the Sega CD, you'll notice a whole bunch of cool stuff. So this baby right here is the 68,000 CPU, which was almost twice as fast as the Genesis CPU. And this side over here had the improved sound processing chips, which is why Bill Walsh just sounds better on the Sega CD. Now, this big chip, the CD Engine, was the main graphics processor, and in theory this could outpace Nintendo's famous Mode 7. But the thing is that there were two problems. So the first problem is that Sega really needed companies to produce games specifically for the Sega CD, which of course would cost those companies more money. It was a lot easier for companies like EA Sports to just take the old game and remake it, sort of, slap some full motion video on there for good measure, and then sell it as a new game. And second, the Sega CD actually went through the Sega Genesis to output the video. This page comes from the manual for the Sega CD Model 2, and you'll notice that you have to physically connect the Sega CD to the Genesis to get the thing to work. Back here you can see that you need to connect the Genesis to the TV or the monitor. In other words, the video signal is going entirely through the Sega Genesis. Here on the back of the Sega CD, we can see stereo line-out RCA cable ports and an audio line-in port if you're using the Model 1 Genesis. And the thing on this side is for the AC adapter. Notice, however, that there's no video out anywhere. So you ask, why is that a problem? Well, the thing is that the Sega CD relied on the Genesis to display anything to the screen. So that meant that the Sega CD was limited to the 61 simultaneous colors that the Genesis could display at once. Now, the CD did have a graphics coprocessor. That's where you could do the pseudo 3D Mode 7 stuff, assuming that the programmers actually put it into the game. Unfortunately, the majority of Sega CD games don't even have that stuff. You also have to remember that the Super Nintendo out of the box could do 256 different colors at one time through its 2 picture processing units. So basically, the only reason why we even had the Sega CD was for that additional storage space, for the CD quality audio, and for the possibility of doing that 3D stuff, even though the actual graphics wound up looking mostly like normal Genesis games. This is a huge problem when you realize just how expensive the Sega CD was. When Bill Walsh College Football came out on the Sega CD in December 1993, the Sega CD itself cost over $200. That was in addition to the $100 that the Genesis cost. You could find deals on the Sega CD if you shopped around, but you were still going to spend something like $350 after tax for both units, and that's before you got any games. Meanwhile, the very best deals I could find for Bill Walsh College Football and the Sega CD ran just under $60. It was kind of an expensive Christmas present. Anyway, if you add all of that up, you're going to be spending over $400 for the two systems and for a game that does not look considerably better than the Sega Genesis version. And all you're getting on that game is like the same graphics, maybe a little bit better audio, and this full motion video thing that you're probably not going to watch anyway. I mean, the game itself doesn't play any different than the Genesis version. Now, I'm not saying that Bill Walsh on the Sega CD is a bad game. It's actually a lot of fun, even if it's got some of those old Madden problems. It's just that this kind of game doesn't exactly scream the future of video games to you. Based on the journalism of the time, it seems that Sega was really counting on the fact that it was selling a CD-ROM unit to be impressive enough for people to buy it. Now, I don't know the actual sales statistics, but it's pretty clear that most consumers preferred the cheaper options, especially since Super Nintendo games look just as good as the best Sega CD games. So you really have to wonder why in the world the Sega CD was even released as an add-on. It would have been a lot better and a lot more powerful if it were a standalone system instead of something that was just leeching onto the Sega Genesis. And the worst part of all is that the next generation console, the Sega Saturn, was leaked to the US media in January 1994. That's the month after this game came out. That was so prominent that it was featured on the cover of Video Games magazine that month, though it's hiding here behind the mailing label. And of course, all of this was before the Sega 32X, which was a really bizarre release that was yet another expensive add-on that came out only a few months before the Saturn. So in other words, as much fun as Bill Walsh College Football is on the Sega CD, it really didn't make any sense for the game to come out in the first place. Certainly, it was not worth it for EA to devote more time and resources to piecing together a brand new game, so they just took the old one and literally ported it on over. They just copied it over. Now, it wasn't worth it for the gamers to buy the system, since it was obvious that a bigger and a better Sega system was coming out soon. And honestly, Bill Walsh was just another version of Madden 93, which was a game that had already seen a whole ton of variations. I've already talked about Madden 93 on the Sega Genesis, of course. And then there was Championship Edition, which was a rental-only version of the exact same game that had a couple of different teams. There was also the Super Nintendo version, though at least there was only one copy of that one out there. And then there was the Genesis version of Bill Walsh College Football, which we just talked about. Now, there are some different plays, sure, but this is really the same game as Madden 93 with a very few differences. And then you've got the stranger ports of Madden 93, the ports and the miscellaneous games that are all basically the same core game, just with different graphical skins. Mutant League Football is simply Madden 93 with really obnoxious sound effects and on-field deaths. The Turbo Duo CD version of Madden is Madden 93 with more simple graphics and slightly better play control. And then there was the 3DO version of John Madden Football, which was Madden 93 with what looked kind of like 3D graphics.
There's nothing that can change the momentum or turn around a game like an interception.
Add the Sega CD version of Bill Walsh College Football to the mix, and you've got a dizzying variety of versions of the exact same game. So it's almost like Madden 93 was destined to be modded and to be ported like until the end of time. The biggest problem for Bill Walsh College Football on the Sega CD, though, was that Madden 94 had come out the exact same month on the Sega Genesis, and Madden 94 actually looked better. This is what Madden 94 looks like on the Genesis. The graphics look really good for its time. Compare it to the blocky sprites in Bill Walsh College Football on the Sega CD. Now remember, you would wind up paying over $200 extra just to get the system to play this game. So in the end, it just wasn't worth it. I mean, EA didn't port Madden to the Sega CD because there really was no point in doing so. It wasn't going to look any better than Madden 93 was on the Genesis, and Madden 94, which just came out on the Genesis, was already an improvement. I mean, the only thing that we're going to get out of any sort of port was maybe improved audio, and I'm guessing that Bill Walsh probably didn't sell all that well anyway. Plus, the fact that EA didn't port its flagship game over to the Sega CD at that time was a pretty strong hint about what EA thought of the Sega CD as a system. Remember that EA did elect to port that game over to the ridiculously overpriced 3DO system. While the Sega CD hung around until early 1995 when this ad was printed, it was about to disappear. By September 1995, gamers had turned to the classified ads to unload their Sega CD units. That was the month that the Sony PlayStation debuted, and that was the CD system that changed everything. While it was expensive at $300 brand new, the PlayStation was a standalone unit, and it was obviously a lot more capable than the Sega CD ever could be. Now, the real reason why the Sega CD and the Sega 32X wound up failing is because the PlayStation made both systems obsolete immediately. And of course, you didn't need to have an older system in order to play the PlayStation. Now, the Sega Saturn did hold its own for a while, but in the end, the PlayStation really changed the way that the gaming industry worked. But that is another story for another day. And so Bill Walsh on the Sega CD is kind of an oddity. It came out in that brief window of optimism for the Sega CD. It really is a lot of fun to play this game, just like the Genesis version. But it was dated and it felt obsolete the day that it was released. Well, it's still fun to play these games these days, it really is. But this game on Sega CD was not exactly a great seller, and in the collecting market today, it's really not all that valuable. Now, if you really want some good old-fashioned college football, I recommend sticking with the Genesis version. You can get a Genesis for cheap. The Genesis game is seen as a sports game, so collectors really don't care so much about it. You can get like 2 controllers, have a buddy come over, and you can play it all day long. It's a ton of fun. You're not going to miss anything by skipping out on the Sega CD version.